Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Good morning, good afternoon. I would like to welcome all the speakers and contributors to today's session. We are looking forward to learn from your expertise, and we hope today's conference is an experience everyone will enjoy and benefit from. Please start, please. I will call for the first speaker, please. Who will be?
Greetings. This is Dr. Carl Golnick, providing an introduction for our symposium that's taking place at the Miyako annual meeting, 9:30 to 10:30 a.m., Saturday, June 5th. This is in combination with the Ophthalmology Foundation Education Consortium, and it's entitled Presentation Skills, How to Improve the Effectiveness of Lectures. The first question, I think, just to ask yourself is, how effective are your lectures? Because probably all of you lecture at some time or another. So are they, 1, very effective? I give great presentations. Or 2, quite effective. My students look engaged. Or 3, not so effective. My students don't seem to be interested. Or 4, I'm not sure. What does it mean to be effective? So there are strengths and there are weaknesses of lecture. So some of the strengths, well, it's inexpensive in general. It's a good way to disseminate information, sometimes too much information. It hopefully will stimulate learner interest, and it can be used to introduce or clarify difficult topics. However, there are weaknesses. It can induce passivity and compliance. The students just sit there unless you are interacting. So interaction may be difficult. We're going to try to supply some tips. And then other questions that I have sometimes when I'm lecturing, are the learners engaged? Are the learners learning? So a lecture doesn't necessarily leave you with ways to determine that. So our goal of the symposium is that you will be able to improve your lecture effectiveness. And we have some objectives. Number 1, you should be able to list adult learning principles. 2, provide structure for organization of knowledge during your lecture. 3, apply principles for the presentation of the content. What should the slides look like? 4, improve your communication skills, which is a part of lecturing. And 5, name at least 3 strategies to improve interactivity during your lectures. So our outline is simple. There will be several talks. The first, Designing Lectures According to Adult Learning Principles by Dr. Helena Felipe from Lisbon, Portugal. The second, Structure of the Lecture from Gabriela Plis from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I will give a talk on communication skills. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, United States. And then Gabby will give another talk on slide design. And finally, Interactive Strategies by Dr. Eduardo Majorga from Buenos Aires. So enjoy and look forward to you throughout the upcoming symposium.
Greetings, my name is Helena Prior Felipe. I'm a consultant of ophthalmology practicing in Lisbon, Portugal. I acknowledge Miyako and the Ophthalmic Foundation for the opportunity to be speaking about designing lectures according to adult learning principles in the next few minutes. The goal of this presentation is that by the end of it, we will all be better able to apply adult learning principles while creating presentations. More specifically, to organize knowledge in the educational design informed by learning theories, include relevant and useful content, and incorporate active learning strategies. Understanding how adults learn can be helpful in program planning. Adults learn best when learning is relevant to their practice, when it's focused on problem solving, when previous experience is acknowledged, when they maintain responsibility for their own learning, are actively engaged, have opportunities to interact with peers, and are provided with opportunities to apply what has been learned. Theories of learning are abstract frameworks which describe how knowledge is received, processed during a learning experience. We will share in the next few slides 6 learning theories that describe how physicians learn and change and can thus be helpful in planning a learning experience. Physicians are motivated to learn and change in practice by relevant personal, professional, and social drivers. By identifying these factors and having them into account, this can guide the planning of an intervention. Learning can occur through a cycle of experience. This model helps planning interventions, considering opportunities for experiencing all aspects of the learning cycle to solve a problem and consolidate knowledge. Learning occurs through reflection, when something is happening or has happened, and in accordance to regauge the practice. The theory supports self-assessment professional responsibilities and also acknowledges prior experience. Self-assessment can be guided by data and by a mentor, but for this to work, some requirements must be met, such as the creation of a safe and trustful learning environment, building constructive relationships, and a culture of multidirectional feedback. Learning is a social activity. Learning occurs through interaction with others and the environment and considers personal values and experiences. Learning occurs when looking and observing others doing, performing, and looking at them as role models, and also developing a sense of self-efficacy. Learning occurs through gradually increasing participation in the activities of the community. Practical learning is situated within practice and occurs through social interactions. Having briefly reviewed these 6 theories of learning that can be helpful when planning a learning intervention, we will now see in the next 2 slides 2 models that can be also helpful in deciding about relevant and useful content. This is an iterative model in which each component informs and is informed by others components to answer 3 golden questions. Where am I going? To illuminate the formulation of learning objectives for this same learning experience. How will I get there? To decide about the most adequate educational strategies. And finally, how will I know that I'm really there? And this accounts for the strategies for assessment of the outcomes. Another model that can be helpful is, for instance, starting a learning experience by addressing the learning needs previously assessed and the gap identified to capture attention and predispose for learning. Showing and illustrating case and the best way to come for a solution maintains attention and enables for further learning. Finally, providing opportunities for further practice as reminders, giving and providing feedback will reinforce learning and promote retention. The next slides will explore how and why to incorporate active learning strategies in our learning experience. For instance, what happens in a 50 minutes lecture is depicted in the diagram at the left, where attention declines and a last boost of attention usually comes associated with the word summary. So to overcome this, we can intersperse activities within segments of 10 minutes lectures and keep a more stable level of attention of our audience. So active learning refers to a broad range of teaching strategies, and in many ways the principle behind active learning is similar to the idea of learning on the job. Several theories and models also illuminate active learning. For instance, learners need to be engaged. They need to be motivated. So motivational learning theory can be useful when thinking about this particular aspect. Learners need to set and monitor their own goals. They are self-directed learners. So self-directed learning theory also have a space here. Learners need to recognize for themselves the problem to trigger and develop new knowledge. So here we think about the transformational learning theory. And finally, social learning theories are also useful when considering interactive lecturing because learners need to interact with others to improve their learning. Speaking about educators need to be more than teachers, facilitators, more than sages, guides. So they need to develop facilitator skills to enable active learning and engage learners as active participants in their own learning. They need to know their audience, their own community of learners, assess baseline knowledge, know their expectations and their needs, so they can best customize the learning experience. And they should also be expert in providing opportunities for interaction. And this slide shows some of the possibilities, some of the strategies of active learning, from the simplest, as for instance asking to write in a minute the thing that was most surprising or striking in a learning intervention, to the more complex as jigsaw discussions where an element of each of the home group goes into expert groups to develop learning in the subtopics so that he or she can bring back to the home group an improved knowledge in a subtopic that can be essential for solving the problem that has been proposed. Interactive lectures, as we have been saying, incorporating audio response systems, simulations, case studies, etc., can be used and should be chosen in accordance to the learning domain that we are intervening and wish to improve knowledge, skills, or attitudes. In summary, theories of learning can effectively inform the instructional design. Aligning needs, goals, and objectives and educational strategies and evaluation is key for successful learning. Capturing, maintaining, and retaining learning engagement is important. And finally, active learning engages learners and facilitates higher levels of learning. Thank you so very much for your attention and my heartfelt wishes of a fruitful Congress.
Greetings, my name is Gabriela Palis, and in this section of the symposium, I'm going to cover the organization of the lecture. The objectives of this part of the symposium are that by the end of it, you will be able to structure a lecture to provide more clarity and understanding of the content to your students. We can say that the structure of the lecture can be defined as a three-act play, where we have an introduction, the body, and the conclusion or the end. The introduction is where you preview what you are going to talk about or what you are going to cover during the lecture. It's where you say what you are going to say, what you're going to talk about. The body is the presentation itself, where you present the content. And the conclusion is the review of the presentation, of what you just have said. The introduction should include the goals and objectives of the presentation, the relevance and importance of the lecture, and the outline of the content. For defining your goals and objectives, first of all, you need to know your audience. Who are they? What do they need? What do they already know? It's different to give a lecture to first-year students about uveitis than to third-year residents. Probably they will have different background knowledge, so you need to know your audience to plan accordingly. When you define the objectives of your lectures, it's important to select adequate verbs to define them. So, for example, if you want your students to understand the anatomy of the angle, maybe you can choose a different verb, like to sketch the anatomy of the angle, because that is something that you can observe, that you can measure, and that you can assess, while understand is something that it's not easily accessible. Or, for example, to learn the treatment options. How do we know that a student has learned the treatment options? It's because he is able to list the treatment options. So this should be my objective, to list the treatment options. When we discuss the relevance and importance of the content, it's important to focus on why our students should listen to our lecture. Why is the topic relevant to them? Not to me as an expert or as an ophthalmologist, but why is this topic going to be relevant for them? How are they going to be able to apply this to their daily lives? The second part of the lecture is the body, and for this we have different formats. We have a content-oriented plan where we introduce the topic, then we discuss a list of key points, and then we present the conclusion. But we also have the problem-focused plan, and this is the typical clinical case presentation where you introduce the clinical case, then you have different solutions that you discuss with your students, you compare them, and then you present a definition for the case. Something that we need to remember when we present the content is to avoid what is called cognitive overload. This means that you don't need to present your students with everything that's out there relating to the content during the presentation. You should present what's more important, what's more applicable to the daily practice, what's more controversial or difficult to understand. But you don't need to present them with everything that's there and make a very long presentation. For them, it's really difficult to maintain their concentration, so avoid cognitive overload and just present the important facts. It's important that the content is relevant, it's updated, it's concise and important. And for this, clinical cases are the best ways of presenting the content, because here students can easily see the application of the theory to the practice. And also you can provide your own experience and how you solve that clinical cases. And finally, in the end of the presentation is where we present the conclusion or a take-home message. And this can take the format of a summary of the most important aspects that you cover during the presentation, or a take-home message, or something that is going to be really important for them in practice. Bad conclusions are those that are unrelated to the content, or superficial, or irrelevant. Like saying, for example, "Thank you for your attention," or showing a picture of your kids or the place where you live without providing a useful conclusion. So you can show a picture of your family or a picture of the place where you live, but first be sure that you presented a meaningful conclusion. So in summary, the organization of the lecture can be presented as a 3-act play, where you have the introduction that should include the goals and objectives, the importance of the lecture for your students, and an outline of the content. Then you have the body, that it's the content itself that should be relevant, concise, updated, and important. And finally, the conclusion that has to be meaningful and useful for daily application. In the next part of the symposium, Carl will discuss communication skills. Thank you very much for your attention.
Greetings, it's Dr. Carl Golnick again. I will be giving the third portion of this presentation on communication skills, a critical component of giving effective lectures. So my objective for this short talk is that you'll be able to list at least 3 ways to enhance your communication skills and apply that to your lectures. First, I want to just show you a quick video, and I want you to be thinking about this video and thinking about what is the speaker doing well and maybe what the speaker's not doing so well.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the Great Depression, passed the the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised or lowered raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics, voodoo economics.
Okay, so you probably recognize a number of things you shouldn't do in that video, and maybe one or two things that were okay. So let's talk about communication skills and what makes a good communicator. So oftentimes in a live venue, we can ask the audience, what are the characteristics of someone you feel is a good communicator, someone who gives a good lecture? What are those characteristics? And here are some things that come up constantly. Being passionate. You want to believe that the lecturer is interested in their own material, right? If you don't think the lecturer's interested, why would you be interested? So be passionate about it. Hopefully it's something you want to be talking about and want to be teaching. Humorous, I think, is good. A little bit's good if it's relevant to the material. So I think humorous people like it when it's humorous. Maybe the video was a little humorous. You should be able to, this is something, a characteristic that was said, to check understanding. Does the lecturer check once in a while to make sure the students understand what he or she is saying? And then eye contact. That's difficult. I can't really make eye contact on Zoom here, but in an audience, eye contact is very important. I still am working on that myself. And then one of the important adult learning principles that you've heard about is relevance. Sometimes you have to tell the audience why this is relevant to the student. Other things, telling stories. Stories are memorable. So telling stories, if the stories, of course, are relevant to the material, can be helpful for the learner. Of course, these stories, if you're telling them, would be from personal experience, but other personal experiences, if they're not stories, it gives it more of a human sort of a quality. Getting feedback from the trainees. So that's important for communication. In other words, asking questions, asking for answers, trying to judge whether the trainees are learning what you think. Asking questions, of course, Dr. Majorga will talk about that. And then body language, something hard to demonstrate in the Zoom format. But I think the body language, being excited, being interested, are all things that are important. And these are things that come up from audiences that we've dealt with in the past. So being conversational and not monotone. In the video, you heard a rather monotone presentation where he really didn't change what his voice sounded like. It was rather boring. So be conversational. Make eye contact, I already mentioned that. And smile. You want to produce a good learning environment. Have a good time. Provide positive reinforcement. Never, ever intimidate or embarrass. I remember distinctly when I was in early residency training and one of my professors asked a question and I did not know the answer. And he said, "Dr. Golnick, you should be reading. I can't believe you don't know the answer to that. A first-year medical student would know the answer." I thought right then and there, I will never do this in a lecture. So never intimidate or embarrass. You want there to be good communication, interaction, and so on. If you do that, you will not have the students interacting with you. Emphasize the important points. Show they're relevant if you need to. Lecture is a good way to give a lot of information, but be careful. They're not going to remember everything you say. So point out the important points. And don't just read your slides. You've all been to lectures where the person's just reading their slide, line after line. Just send me it, email it to me. I can do that much faster on my own. Don't just read your slides. Put the stuff on the slides that will remind you what to say. Recording yourself is a great way to get better. These days, everyone's got a video camera in their phone, pretty much. Record yourself. You'll see things that are interesting when you do. And don't forget to stay on time. You're given a certain amount of time. If you go over time, people aren't listening anyway. They're wondering when you're going to be done. Hey, this was supposed to end 10 minutes ago. What's going on? So stay on time. So in summary, for communication skills, they are necessary for good presentations and when you do it well, they will certainly enhance the learning of your audience. Thank you very much.
Hello again. In this segment of the symposium, we will cover some principles of slide design. I will first ask you to reflect on what is for you the most important principle regarding the design of slides. That they are colorful and animated, simple and direct, they have lots of information, or they include references. Any thoughts? Probably you will agree with me that they should be simple and direct, and let's see why. Probably all of you have seen slides such as this one, full of text, with irrelevant images, irrelevant animations, difficult background, or such as this one, with very small print, a big logo, but it's really difficult to read the content. Or tables such as this one when we present our work. So the objectives of my presentation will be that by the end of it, you will be able to select the slide background, color and text to make them more clear and easy to read, to replace text by images, and to display data. The principle underlying slide design is that what's important in a lecture is your message. The slide is only a visual aid, so the slide should support or should aid what you are actually saying. The other principle is that our memory and our attention have limited capacity. So if you present a person with a lot of text to read, and at the same time they have to listen to what you're saying, and at the same time they are looking at images, it's going to be very difficult for them to selectively choose what they are going to pay attention to and what their memories are going to retain. So let's see first backgrounds, colors, and texts. Take a look at this slide. This has a picture of a hospital in the background and some text on it. So if I'm giving you a lecture about something, any topic, you will be trying to figure out here what hospital is this one? Is it my hospital, your hospital? What is she talking about? So the background here is very distracting. So the concept you need to retain is that backgrounds should not compete with the content. Also here, you can see this grass growing up here, and I'm talking about viral conjunctivitis. This background has nothing to do with what I'm saying. So choose backgrounds that are simple and that do not compete with the content you are presenting. It is controversial what is the best color for your background, but what is really important is the contrast between the background and the text. So here in the left part of the slide, you will see a blue over black. That is not very good contrast, so it's difficult to read, while white over black is very easy to read. So you should be very selective when you choose the color of your text that makes good contrast with the background. The same in the box in the right. The yellow over white or pink over white is really difficult to read because they do not provide good contrast, while brown over white or black over white is easier to read. The same when you are selecting the typography, and this is especially important when you are giving a presentation that is face-to-face and you have a very big room. So select big fonts, ideally over 28 points, and select always with the last row in mind, that the people that are sitting in the last row are able to read your slides. So in summary, for the backgrounds, the colors and text, be minimalistic. Use non-distractive backgrounds, use good contrast, and select big defined fonts, ideally with more than 28 to 24 points and that are sans serif. The second point we will cover is the use of images. This is something that media use very well. Usually when you see an advertisement about not drinking and driving, you will not see a lot of text there. you will see an image, one that is very impactful. This is because for us, for our brains, it's easier to retain an image than to retain written text. So whenever you can, avoid lists of bulleted text because people will try to read them instead of listening to what you are saying. And for them, it's going to be difficult to retain all these texts. Let's suppose that you're giving a lecture on nystagmus. Instead of using this list of descriptions for nystagmus, you can present a video. So it will be easier for you to explain the characteristics of nystagmus to your students with a video, and for them it's going to be easier to retain what you're saying instead of showing them a list of bulleted text. The same with this presentation about fluorescein angiography, and I'm showing here the defects in the pigment epithelium, a long list of description there, and a very small image and a graphic. Instead of this, I could show you a bigger image and a bigger graphic and explain with my voice the graphic and the image instead of showing you the written description of it. And the third point I wanted to cover was how we display data. And this is something that we tend to do when we present our work or when we present the published papers by other authors. We present the tables with the results. And it's difficult for people to read all this data while you are speaking or to understand what you are trying to say just by showing them the table with the numbers. So if instead of doing this, we present something like this, and we explain the differences between the groups with a graphic instead of with a table, it will be easier for them to understand what you're trying to say. But let's suppose that you don't have the time or you don't know how to prepare those graphics that are in fact pretty easy with PowerPoint. At least point them with a circle where they should be paying attention and explain them the numbers. So here you can see that 1068 is the double of people than the other group. Or here it's 5 times the number of patients than in the other group. So explain the numbers for people to understand what you're trying to say. So the rules for displaying data is to get to the point, pick the right graphic, highlight what is important, and keep graphics simple. It's difficult for people to understand graphics just by showing them on a slide. You need to explain what the graphic means. So in conclusion, you should keep things simple and legible, fewer bullets, use more images and videos, and explain your data. In the next segment, Eduardo Mayorga will talk about strategies for increasing interactivities during lectures. So thank you very much for your attention.
Hello, I'm Dr. Eduardo Mayorga, Director for e-learning for the Pan American Association of Ophthalmology. The objectives of this presentation are that by the end of it, you will be able to explain why we need to add interactivity to our lectures and apply different ways of doing it. I will divide the presentation into 2 parts. First, we will see why we need interactivity during lectures, and then we will talk about different ways of generating this interactivity. Lectures rank very low in retention rates as compared to other teaching interventions. Why is this? As you know, teaching and learning are not the same. Teaching is the process done by a teacher intended generally to transfer or facilitate the acquisition of knowledge, skills, or values by the learner. Learning is the process in which learners incorporate, process, store, and afterwards retrieve and apply knowledge, skills, or values to solve real-world problems. Usually, as teachers, we focus on the transference phase. Adding interactivity to lectures is one way of helping the processing phase. When you ask a question to the audience, it evokes previous knowledge. This will help in several ways. It will allow you to determine learners' knowledge and allow you to adjust your presentation to it. When you give feedback to their answers, they will be able to identify false assumptions, and you will also be able to identify what they know and what they do not know. Finally, they will be able to connect new knowledge with old one. This is one of the mechanisms that allows storing in memory and later retrieval and application. Let's now take a look at the rational. The structured and ordered way in which we present knowledge to our residents on books and traditional lectures is not the best way to take them from novices to experts, developing their critical thinking capabilities. Critical thinking enables students to differentiate relevant from irrelevant data, identify important cues in the data, identify when additional data are needed for decision making, and identify patients' problems. A great exercise for applying critical thinking is presenting a case showing the main complaint of the patient. Then ask for the differential diagnosis. After that, you give them the findings of the basic examination. And then you keep going through all the different steps of examining a patient until they're able to make a diagnosis, a treatment decision, and then you present them the outcome. If the outcome is not good, then you can start the circle again. Interactivity is usually obtained through questions the teachers ask the students to respond. With large audiences, you can only have it with a very small portion of the audience. When working with your residents in small groups, interactivity can be maintained, but once you have asked an open-ended question and one resident answers, you will never know if the rest of the residents had the answer in mind. There are different types of questions you can present your students with. Survey open-ended questions pose no problem because it does not matter if participants listen to others' answers before they answer. They usually will not be influenced by others' answers when they give theirs. When it comes to knowledge questions, there are two kinds of questions you can ask. One, open-ended questions, where you pose the question like, which is the furthest planet from the Sun? Usually, open-ended questions assess knowledge better. The other way of presenting knowledge questions is through multiple choice questions. This is usually one of the ways most used. In this way, usually everybody can answer when using answering systems, as we will see in a moment. In case you didn't know, Pluto is the furthest planet from the Sun, even though some do not consider Pluto a planet. So, as we said before, if you ask a question and somebody answers in loud voice, you will never know if the rest of the audience knew the answer. So this is where answering systems come very handy. Nowadays, the systems are not expensive because learners use their phones as answering systems.
Zoom can be used as an answering system, whether you're running a webinar or a face-to-face classroom. In the case of the online meeting, you use the polling system for getting answers for multiple choice questions. You use the chat for open-ended surveys, and in this case, everybody is allowed to see the answers because it's a survey. In the case that you use the chat for open-ended questions, then you will have to set it up in a way that participants are only allowed to chat with the host. For doing this, in the host window at the bottom right, you have 3 dots. When you click on them, a new small window opens, and there you have the options for participants can chat with. In this case, for open-ended knowledge questions, you must select host. In this way, only the host will see the answers, and after everybody has answered, he will be able to comment on the right answer and on any other answers he received. In the case of the face-to-face meetings, Zoom can be also used as an answering system. And the considerations we had about the polling system and the chat are the same in this case. But what you must remember, if you are in a room, you must disable video cameras from everybody, and most important, you have to disable the microphones for all, including the host's microphone. Ideally, you should have more than one screen, one for the presentation where you do your work, and a second screen where an assistant is managing the answering system. It can be done with only one screen, but you will need to practice a lot.
So summarizing, we saw in this lecture how useful it is interactivity to develop critical thinking skills in our residents. We viewed that usually as teachers and giving lectures, we concentrate on the transference phase, while for our learners really to learn, they need the processing phase, where they incorporate, process, store, retrieve, and luckily apply what they've learned to real case scenarios. We also saw that the traditional way we teach with books and lectures is not the best way to take our residents from the beginner stage to becoming experts. We saw the importance of presenting cases where we take our residents from analyzing the main complaint to getting to make a diagnosis, a treatment, and review the results. And finally, we saw how answering systems can help us achieving all this.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed the symposium. I'm going to provide a very brief conclusion and summary of presentation skills, how to improve the effectiveness of lectures. So as you'll remember, our symposium goal was to improve your lecture effectiveness. And we had objectives. The first was to list adult learning principles. Here's a few of them. Make sure the material is relevant and applicable. Try to have active participation and make sure you can connect this to their previous experiences. 2, provide structure for the organization of knowledge. Think of the lecture as the 3-act play. They should always have an introduction with goals and objectives. If you need to emphasize the importance, and then if it's a long lecture, provide an outline. 2, body the content. Make sure it's relevant, concise, important, and updated. And finally, a conclusion. Make sure that it's meaningful. I'm hoping you'll find my conclusion right now meaningful. The 3rd, apply principles for presentation of content. Leonardo da Vinci said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So keep it simple, don't distract, make sure the audience sees what you want them to see in your slides. 4, improve communication skills. Be passionate. The audience wants to believe that you are interested in the material. If you're not interested, why should they? Produce a good learning environment. It's very important. And record yourself. You'll find things that you might do or say that will surprise you. And believe me, if you record yourself, you will improve your communication skills. And finally, name 3 strategies for interactivity. Of course, there's lots of ways to do this in regular lecture. And as Eduardo pointed out, with the Zoom, ask questions, polls, they're in live lectures, they're automated response systems, something called Socrates is an online polling system. And Eduardo, of course, talked about a number of ways to improve interactivity. So we would all like to thank you for your attention and hopefully you will be able to improve your lecture effectiveness after attending this presentation.